terrified German shepherd, hid in silence for weeks, until one voice awakened his soul. Scene 1. The Silent Prisoner. The air inside Riverside County Animal Shelter was thick with tension. Barking echoed from every corner, some playful, others desperate, but none louder than the silence from the kennel tucked furthest back in the medical wing. Inside it, a skeletal figure pressed himself against the concrete wall, trying to disappear into the shadows. They called him Shadow. 3 years old, malnourished, barely clinging to life, this German shepherd wasn't just another rescue. Unlike others who wagged their tails in cautious hope, Shadow made no sound, no movement, no eye contact. His body trembled in the presence of humans, but even more haunting was his refusal to respond at all. It was as if the spirit inside him had been locked away, unreachable. Marlena Gutierrez, the shelter's seasoned director, surveyed the overcrowded facility and sighed. "We're over capacity," she murmured, her voice heavy, "and we've already added 15 dogs to the euthanasia list this week." Shadow hadn't barked once since his arrival. Surrounded by chaos, whimpering pups, pleading eyes, metal clinking, mop buckets squeaking, he remained utterly still. His kennel was quiet, dark and cold. Not even food tempted him forward. There in that corner he wasn't just a dog, he was a wound shaped like a shepherd. And sometimes the deepest kind of suffering isn't loud, it hides in silence, waiting for someone to notice the pain beneath the stillness. Scene 2. A fragile bet. Kelsey's last hope. The shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Kelsey Martinez walked the corridor, a paperback novel tucked under her arm. As the shelter's behavioral specialist, she had worked with the broken, the fearful, and the feral. But Shadow was different. He was a ghost with fur. Present in body, absent in soul. For 2 weeks she had tried everything, soft-spoken words, calming body language, even high-value treats. Yet nothing pierced the fog surrounding him. He didn't growl or snap, he simply ceased to be. Ceased. That Thursday afternoon, with the clock ticking toward a grim Friday deadline, Kelsey chose something radical in its simplicity: stillness. Instead of approaching Shadow's kennel, she sat on the floor across the hallway, her back resting against the cold cement wall. She opened her book, not as bait, but as presence. She read aloud in a soft, rhythmic voice, barely more than a whisper. She didn't look at him, didn't call his name, didn't ask anything of him. Time slowed. Footsteps echoed elsewhere in the building, but this narrow stretch of corridor felt suspended outside of time. For nearly an hour, she read. Then, just as she shifted to stand, she felt it. Instinct before observation. She looked up gently, careful not to move too fast. Shadow was still huddled in his corner, but his amber eyes were no longer buried in the wall. They were watching her, not with fear, not yet with trust, but with awareness. Their eyes met, brief, tentative, profound. For the first time since his rescue, he had chosen to look at someone. Kelsey's breath caught. "There's still someone in there," she whispered later. "I saw him." And in that fleeting connection, forged through patience and quiet compassion, hope stirred where despair had made its home. Scene 3. Guided by fate, Claire's unexpected arrival. The next morning unfolded like any other in the overburdened shelter. Volunteers moved in quiet routine, the metallic clatter of food bowls echoing through the narrow halls. Outside, the sun cast sharp lines of light across the concrete floors, stark, unfeeling. Claire Winslow hadn't planned to stay long. Arms full of old towels and blankets, she stepped into the shelter's lobby. An act of quiet kindness meant only to honor her late mother, a woman who had once volunteered here many years before. "I'm just dropping these off," Claire explained gently to the receptionist. But fate, invisible patient, was already at work. Mike Russell, the weekend supervisor, overheard her. "Would you like a quick tour? We've made a lot of changes since your mum's time here." Claire hesitated. She wasn't looking for a dog. She wasn't even sure she was looking for anything at all. "Still, I have a few minutes." The tour was warm and noisy, wagging tails, hopeful eyes pressed against kennel bars. Puppies tumbled over one another, eager for attention. Adult dogs barked, their voices filling the air with life and longing. But when they reached the farthest section, where the broken souls waited, everything changed. "This is Shadow," Mike whispered. "Our hardest case." In the dim back corner of his kennel, the German shepherd barely moved. His golden eyes flickered warily, tracking them with ancient fear. Something inside Claire stilled. Without thinking, without asking, she lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged against the wall, mirroring the exact posture Kelsey had taken the day before. No words, no movement, just presence. It wasn't strategy, it wasn't training. It was instinct, it was destiny. And as Claire sat there, heart steady, breathing soft, the invisible thread of fate grew taut between a wounded animal and a woman who didn't yet know she was already part of his story. Scene 4. The invisible connection. Claire returns, a quiet presence of healing. The next day, the shelter doors creaked open just after sunrise. Claire Winslow returned, not with expectations, not with plans, but with something far rarer: time. In her arms, a small folding chair, in her bag, a book, and in her heart, a quiet resolve she couldn't quite explain. "I didn't think you'd come back," Kelsey admitted softly at the front desk, surprised. "I couldn't stop thinking about him," Claire replied. Simple, honest words that needed no further explanation. Together they walked the long, sterile corridor toward the farthest kennel. The same corner, the same shadow of a dog. But as Claire approached, something barely perceptible shifted. Shadow lifted his head. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even clear to the untrained eye, but Kelsey saw it. The subtle tilt of ears, the minute easing of tension in his bony frame. He remembered her. Without a word, Claire set her chair down several feet from the kennel's door, careful not to face him directly. She angled her body sideways, non-threatening. Deliberate, gentle. She sat, she read, softly, slowly, words floating like fragile leaves on a quiet stream. There was no treat in her hand, no leash at the ready, no expectation for anything to happen. Her presence was the gift. Hours passed unnoticed. Occasionally she glanced up, not at Shadow directly, but toward him, letting him feel seen without feeling trapped. He didn't move, not yet. But he watched. And in that long, silent vigil, surrounded by barking, metal, and forgotten souls, the very air seemed to soften around them. This wasn't taming. This wasn't rescue. This was something older, something sacred. This was trust, not given, not earned, but invited, slowly, patiently, like a wounded heart remembering what safety felt like for the first time in forever. Scene 5, a small breakthrough, the first step toward trust. By the third day, the shelter no longer felt foreign to Claire. Her steps down the hallway were slower now, almost meditative. The noise of the other dogs, the metallic rattling of kennel doors, the constant hum of overhead lights, all of it faded when she reached the end of the corridor, where he waited. Shadow was there, exactly as before, curled in his corner, still half swallowed by fear. But something was changing. Not in grand cinematic gestures, but in tiny, precious details only patience could reveal. Claire settled into her folding chair, careful not to cross any invisible lines of his fragile comfort. She read again, her voice soft, low, steady, filling the empty space not with demands, but with presence. And then, as the sun shifted across the small window high above them, it happened. Movement, barely more than a shift of weight at first, a subtle stretching of cramped limbs unused to standing. Shadow's ears twitched. His ribs rose and fell with deeper breaths. His eyes stayed locked on Claire, calculating, watching. Minutes passed, like hours. And then, impossibly, he stood, unsteady, thin legs trembling from both weakness and terror, but standing nonetheless. For Shadow, it was not just movement. It was defiance against a world that had hurt him. It was the quiet rebellion of a soul daring to believe in gentleness once again. Claire never stopped reading. She didn't react with surprise or praise, knowing instinctively that any sudden response might send him retreating. She read about ordinary things, her morning coffee, the sound of birds outside her window, the book in her hands, the world beyond pain. And as Shadow took 2 tentative steps toward the front of the kennel, not reaching for her, not expecting anything, he stepped, unknowingly, across a boundary far more important than metal bars. He stepped toward hope. Scene 6. The mysterious thread of memory. Shadow's past and Captain Jordan. The days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Claire returned every morning like clockwork, a figure of stillness, of safety, of patience. Shadow now waited for her. He would stand near the front of his kennel, watch her set up her chair, and listen as she read about life beyond cages. But something new began to stir beneath the surface. Subtle, instinctive. Shadow had become fascinated, almost fixated on Claire's scent. Whenever she arrived from work, still in her physical therapy uniform, his nose would work overtime, pulling in every trace of something long forgotten, especially her shoes, the hem of her pants. He would linger near the bars longer, nostrils flaring, golden eyes clouded not with fear, but confusion and recognition. It wasn't the scent of treats, it wasn't the smell of the shelter. It was something older, something that belonged to another life. Claire noticed it too. It wasn't just curiosity, it was searching. Days later, during one of her therapy sessions at a veteran's home, the pieces began to fall into place. Captain Ryan Jordan, a former soldier, hardened by war, broken by trauma, recovering slowly from a traumatic brain injury and PTSD. Their session was professional, quiet, until a single detail cracked the ordinary flow. A dog, not just any dog. A German shepherd named Shadow, a military working dog lost years ago after an IED explosion in Afghanistan. As Jordan spoke, voice tightening, memories rising like ghosts, Claire's heart began to pound. The scar on Shadow's shoulder, the way he responded to military sense, the way his spirit was both shattered and waiting. This wasn't coincidence. It was connection, a buried thread of memory stretching across continents, time, and tragedy, now pulling two lost souls back together, human and dog, soldier and companion, both still fighting a war long after the battlefield was gone. Scene 7. The unveiling truth, the shocking past of Shadow. Claire's mind raced long after she left Captain Jordan's home. Shadow. The name echoed through her like a forgotten melody returning from a dream. It couldn't be, could it? The odds were impossible. The distance, the years, the circumstances, the finale, everything argued against it. But the scar, that single scar on Shadow's right shoulder, rough, unmistakable, a silent testimony of battles fought far away from the quiet corridors of a California animal shelter. She had to know. The next time she visited Jordan, her heart pounded as she sat across from him during their therapy session. "Your Shadow?" Claire ventured carefully. What did he look like? Jordan's guarded eyes flickered. "Black and tan German shepherd," he said slowly, as if tasting the pain of every word. "Scar on his right shoulder, got it during a mission. Saved my life pulling me out of a collapsed building." Claire's breath caught. "I've been working with a German shepherd at the shelter," she whispered. "His behavior, his scars, everything matches what you've described." Silence stretched between them, thick, fragile. Jordan's hands curled tightly over his chair's armrest. "That's impossible," he muttered, but his voice betrayed the smallest crack, hope slipping through the armor of disbelief. Claire showed him the pictures. Raw, grainy, but enough. Jordan's reaction was instant. His face paled, his jaw clenched, his breathing grew shallow. This looks like him." His voice broke. "But how? I thought he died or was lost forever." Claire met his eyes, steady and sure. "There's only one way to know." The stage was set. Two broken warriors, torn apart by war, time, and silence, were about to stand at the edge of a truth too wild to imagine. Was this the same Shadow? And if it was, what would happen when their worlds collided again? Everything now hung on a single reunion. One moment, one call, one heart-rending answer waiting in the quiet soul of a forgotten dog. Scene 8. The miracle of the command. Shadows summoning from the past. The shelter had never felt so quiet. Marlene had arranged everything. The meet-and-greet room cleared, the shelter closed for privacy. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Claire pushed Captain Jordan's wheelchair slowly down the dim corridor. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. His heart hammered louder than his footsteps. At the far end of the small room, bathed in soft afternoon light filtering through a single window, sat Shadow, unmoving, unaware, or so it seemed. Jordan took a deep breath, steadying the storm inside him. Claire whispered, "Are you ready?" Jordan's eyes never left the figure of the dog that had haunted his every nightmare and dream. And then, with all the weight of memory, of command, of love unbroken by war or time, his voice rang out, "Attention!" For a single eternal heartbeat, stillness.
Then when everything shattered,
Shadow's head snapped up, his ears shot forward, his body once paralyzed in fear for months transformed in an instant. Recognition flared in his golden eyes like the sun breaking through endless night. His nose worked furiously, pulling in a scent older than pain, older than trauma, a scent of belonging, of home. "Shadow, come!" Jordan's voice broke, rough, raw, a man calling for his lost brother. The reaction was electric. Shadow launched forward, not cautiously, not hesitantly, but with the reckless abandon of a soul that had waited too long to return home. The frail, fearful dog who had once shrunk from every human presence now sprinted across the room, crashing into Jordan's lap with such force that the wheelchair jolted backward.
and then there were no words left.
Only trembling hands buried in thick fur. Only the guttural sound of a soldier sobbing without shame. Only the frantic whines of a dog who had found his person again. Two warriors, scarred, lost, but never truly separated. The past dissolved. Time folded. And in that room, before stunned witnesses, a miracle unfolded. Not of magic, but of memory.
Of loyalty.
Of love that waited and survived. Scene 9. The parallel journey of healing. Man and dog rise together. The days that followed were not marked by grand gestures, but by quiet victories. Jordan and Shadow were inseparable now, not out of need, but out of choice. Two soldiers no longer surviving, but learning to live again. Claire remained the silent bridge between them. Every morning she arrived at Jordan's modest home for physical therapy, but the sessions had changed. The exercises weren't just for Jordan's body, they were for Shadow's soul. When Jordan struggled to lift himself from his chair, Shadow would nudge his hand, a gentle reminder to keep fighting. When Jordan hesitated at the parallel bars, Shadow would sit patiently nearby, his golden eyes steady, unyielding, the same way he once stood beside Jordan in war zones waiting for the next command. The German shepherd, who once flinched at every sound, now moved through the house with purpose, tail low, ears soft, a protector transformed into a healer. And Jordan, the man once bound to his wheelchair by injury and fear, began to rise. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. But on a morning painted with soft California light, Claire watched, tears burning her eyes, as Jordan stood without his cane for the first time in months. Shadow sat beside him like a statue of loyalty reborn. Jordan reached down, ruffling the thick fur he had once thought lost forever.
"Couldn't have done it without you, buddy," he whispered.
Shadow leaned into the touch. No longer the ghost in the corner of a kennel, but a warrior in his own right. Claire smiled quietly. This was what healing looked like. Not loud, not fast, but real, step by step. Hand on fur, man and dog, broken once, now rising together. Because some wounds are never truly healed alone. Scene 10. From darkness to light, the journey comes full circle. 6 months later, the story of Shadow, Jordan and Claire had become something far greater than a rescue tale. It had become a testament to healing. Claire now stood at the doorstep of a new chapter. A job offer from the VA's K9 Therapy Center in Palm Desert. A place where wounded soldiers and traumatized dogs would walk the path of recovery together. It was not just a career move. It was destiny fulfilled. On her final therapy visit, she arrived to find Jordan waiting for her, standing tall at his front door, unaided, with Shadow calmly at his side. No longer a soldier trapped by pain, no longer a dog trapped by fear, but two survivors, whole in their brokenness, stronger because of it. Shadow, once the silent prisoner cowering in a dark corner, had found his purpose again. He now visited shelters with Jordan and Claire, sitting beside dogs too afraid to hope, just as someone once sat beside him. He didn't need words. His presence was enough. And that was the lesson this story leaves behind. Sometimes we don't rescue animals. Sometimes they rescue us. Not by erasing the past, but by teaching us that healing is not about forgetting pain. It's about finding the courage to walk through it.
Together.
Shadow's journey from fear to freedom reminds us all, in a world that often feels loud and heartless, that quiet love, patient presence, and unwavering loyalty can light even the darkest corners of the soul. And when human and animal meet in that space, neither leaves unchanged. They become whole again, together.